Welcome to episode 90 of the XRM Toolcast. In this episode, Scott and I speak with Kartik Kanakasabesan, the principal PM for the Power Platform CLI, also known as PAC, or even known as the PAC CLI. We talk through the history of the tool, some hiccups they've had along the way, where it's headed, and how you can get involved. So if you have ever wanted to know anything about the PAC or the PAC CLI, then this is definitely the episode for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the XRM Toolcast. With me, your host, Daryl, always raising the bar, and Scott. I've got plenty of geek memorabilia to row. Scott, how's it going?
It's very good, Daryl. Thank you. Yeah, you've got to have. Well, I don't have enough geek memorabilia. I think I need more geek memorabilia. I think no one can have enough of it to remind them of simpler times of their childhood when.
Yes.
Because I think that's what it is. We see these things on our shelves and we think, back then we didn't have to worry about this. We didn't,
It used to be you could pick up a video game, not see anything about it, and play it and beat it in one sitting. And now you've got to do hours of YouTube research just to figure out how do I do this and how does that happen. So
exactly, and you just get ridiculed by younger kids who can just do it, in such a quicker way.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy. All those young kids ridiculing us. So,
I think I guess you're referring to the out of time number plate I have on my
yes. That's a little small homage to the upbringing, the right way to be brought up.
where we're going, Daryl, we don't need roads.
We don't need roads. So our guest today, it's another Microsoftie. He's a principal PM manager, a Power Platform developer tools, data analytics maven, product management, theory of constraints / DevOps, UX fan, and a graduate of the University of Toronto, Kartik Kanakasabesan. Kartik, thanks for joining us.
First of all, 10 stars. You're getting my last name right. That is awesome.
Oh, you like that? Okay. Well, it was, I actually spent time today and said, okay, that's a difficult name. And you were kind enough to post on LinkedIn how to pronounce it. So I listened to it. I wrote how I would have written it if I was a fifth grader, because that's about how I do with my spelling. And then I just read what I wrote rather than the actual writing of it. So don't ask me to spell it at this point in time. I'll give you something completely different.
You're completely forgiven. You're completely forgiven. The fact that you actually made an attempt is an amazing piece. So let's just go lead with that.
I think that's my 11th star I've gotten so far. I got one off there already.
Yeah,
so.
There we go.
Yeah.
So full confession.
Breaking the trend here, Daryl.
Yes. I don't know. Yes. So full confession. When we started this, I sent out the message. Hey, let's talk about the CLI. Let's talk about this command line interface stuff. And I had put Power Apps rather than Power Platform because it's much more than just apps. It's everything. It's a whole platform, right? So that's that was my bad on that. But Scott did point out rather acutely that what's the A for then? So Kartik, what's the A for then?
Come on, Kartik. It's great to have you, but this is all we've got you on the show for.
I know exactly. Let me open up the curtains here, right? The Great Wizard of Oz has shown up. All right, great. So, well, you're not wrong, right, Daryl? Let me be very clear. I didn't want to go ahead and kind of admonish you for no apparent reason here. Okay.
No,
look, the history around Power Platform, or the CLI in particular, the genesis was essentially with Power Apps in question, right? And very quickly, we kind of realized that we had to build in a more unifying experience across the board. Folks when I talk to Scott on a regular basis, Scott's tolerance level, from my standpoint, is that of a saint. All right, because and I'll tell you why. It's not like I'm trying to pander to Scott, but the fact is, if I were in Scott's shoes and if I was given a set of tools and said, oh, by the way, you have PowerShell to go do this, you have this SDK to go do that, and if Scott just wants to go from A to B with that particular tool, there was not a clear way to start things off, right? All right, and sorry, Scott, I'm picking on you while I'm on your show here. Okay, so all right.
Usually
But,
we're
it's
the ones
okay. It's
picking
not
on
my
our guests,
show.
but it's okay.
exactly. I'm
You
flipping
can
the
say
script.
what you like.
Yeah, I'm flipping the script. So one of the things that we looked at was saying, okay, how can we kind of curate and focus on the key things that help people like Scott to be able to go from point A to point B without having to go down 10 different rabbit holes to achieve that same objective. And so when we first started, we started saying, okay, yes, the big affinity was around Power Apps at that point in time. So we started off with a name. It was Power Apps CLI. But then as we moved along that continuum and started looking at all the other things that we were enabling, we were actually looking at enabling this across the entire platform. The other thing that we also realized very quickly was that when we encourage people to go talk to just Power Apps in particular, right? One thing you'll notice is that when you're dealing with the Power Platform CLI, it only talks to Dataverse. And there's a reason for that, because those are documented APIs, right?
Oh, I thought it was because it was the best thing to talk to.
That as well.
Okay.
I don't disagree, but one of the great things about Dataverse is the fact that all the API surface is public and it's well documented, right? Whereas if you were to go ahead and build interfaces, which some interfaces do, that work with these undocumented APIs for the respective workloads, whether it be apps, automate, or things like that, that actually adds more risk to the end user. And let's say if you're working with some other customer in general, that risk then further conveys to that customer because you're not giving them a situation where things are repeatable. So the entire raison d'etre for the PAC CLI was, one, to make the developer's job easier to get from point A to point B, but at the same time also de-risk when you have these kind of deployments going on and we have other folks maintaining your stuff, that they have a repeatable way of doing this. So I know it's a very long-winded answer of why what was A, but I kind of gave you the history and the reason why things behave the way they are.
Yeah, it's huge. That's how we have you on here.
Yeah, and it's been a great journey. And how long is the journey? How long ago was the Power Platform CLI or Power Apps CLI when it was first?
Yeah,
when it was first born.
Years.
How long is that?
It's
3
been 3
years.
years.
Right.
Yeah.
3 years.
And,
Wow.
And I've been with it for 2 years. So
Right.
when I joined, that's when all the rebranding started. I was like, no, this doesn't work.
So you had to put your mark in, right? You had to stamp your mark on the project. But before then, as you say, there was lots of different tools, and it was funny because I was doing I did Learn Live with Daniel Laskovic for the recent Ignite and sessions, and we were doing the Learn module that's currently there for all of these different tools, like the plugin registration tool and the configuration management tool and all these different things, and also it had a part of it which was talking about the PAC CLI, and it's quite interesting because it's a mishmash of downloading things from NuGet and installing, kind of unzipping things, but then you've got a CLI that kind of does things. So it does seem that raison d'etre, as you said, which is a great phrase. I think we should use raison d'etre more often. It's French, right? Yeah.
Yes, it is. A reason to live. A reason to live.
Yes, exactly. I think this is the thing, right? We should do this more often. So yeah, I think that is replacing all of those legacy tools. Because originally, was it that it was sort of was it just shelling out to those original tools? Is that how it worked originally?
Actually, yes and no. Certain commands were, certain commands were not. Like even today, under the covers for the PAC CLI, it's still using the Dataverse Service Client, right? And there are some elements that are still also using the CRM Service Util client as well, right? So the SDKs are still there. We are just out now. Our longer arc is, as things keep on moving, we'll gradually move everything onto the Dataverse Service Client. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things that we talk about with a lot of customers. And oddly enough, the reason why I bring up Dataverse Service Client is early in the summer, we GA'd Dataverse Service Client. And it was kind of like a inside joke that we had, because we already had tooling like PAC that was being used in Azure DevOps, in GitHub Actions, that used Dataverse Service Client at a very large scale. But it was still in preview in public. right? So we're like, well, that story doesn't render well. If someone were to really call us out on it, saying, hey, why are you using a preview version of the SDK with with stuff running in my pipeline? Why would I do that? We're like, yeah, that's not going to sound well. So let's go ahead and just GA this thing. But that's one of the key things. There are elements of it there. What we are trying not to do is, and I'll be very clear, and this goes back. A lot of this credit also goes to David Jenny, who's the engineering manager for the Power Platform CLI. He has taken a very hard stance in saying if we're calling on undocumented APIs or undocumented dependencies, there has to be a very good reason for it, right? So that was one thing that both David and I kind of really have held our guard against, and saying, okay, anyone even internally within Microsoft, if you're going to ask us to talk to undocumented system APIs, not doing it. All right, so that's something that we've gone ahead and done. But in the grand scheme of things, with everything that's going on from a Power Platform CLI perspective, it's to go ahead and build those consistent things. Yes, there are still elements and remnants that call to SDKs in particular, but they don't. We've tried to minimize shelling out to, let's say, a PowerShell and calling the PowerShell class directly, which we still do have, by the way. And one thing you'll notice, Scott, too, is the fact that I keep referring to Power Platform CLI as the developer curated CLI. Its intent is never to take on the admin capabilities that we expose in PowerShell today. There's a set of class of users that still live and breathe by those PowerShell scripts, and our intent is never to forklift a lot of that and bring those admin capabilities, if you will, into PAC CLI. But if you come and tell me,
I think all developers are always going to appreciate that stance that you're taking about only using supported CLIs, because I think that supported APIs, because I think in the past there has always been that gray area of how are we going to do that? Well, the Microsoft tools do it, but how can we do it? And you can then sort of reverse engineer by looking at network traces of exactly what's going on. But I think the first time I saw this really happening was through the make.powerapps.com and the administration console. There was that seemed to be the first place where there was a portal that was only using documented APIs against, or more or less documented APIs against Dataverse. So it's really good to see that. And I think, if all developers or across the whole of the Power Platform are going to appreciate having a full set of interactions with the platform, so they can build their own tools if they need to. So just rewind a little bit too. You were mentioning about moving over from the CRM service client to the Dataverse client. So for our handful of listeners, perhaps you could just sort of describe the difference between those two.
Sure. So the CRM service client, with the CRM service SDK, that's there are wonderful tools in the community like XRM Toolbox that actually take advantage of a lot of that capability there. The CRM service client essentially not only talks to Dataverse in the cloud, but also Dataverse on-prem, right? The Dataverse service client is primarily talks to our web API. It doesn't talk to some of the other methods that the CRM service client uses. So it's a purely web API based SDK, and it by nature talks to mostly cloud work. Actually, only talk to cloud workloads. So even when we do our testing internally, we get internal testing folks saying, hey, I love the PAC CLI, but can you have it talk to our on-prem instance? And we have to go and say, no. All right. So the big difference between Dataverse Service Client and the CRM Service Client SDK is the fact that the CRM Service Client SDK talks to both on-prem and to the cloud. Now, I do put a star against that as well, because going forward, we just had the new update for the MSAL library. All right. So that new MSAL library works really well with Dataverse Service Client. And I have it on good authority that Matt's already working on making sure that some of that MSAL work happens with the ADOL library that's already there in the CRM Service Client. So there may be some, current in time coexistence, so to speak, but very, very much so our intent is to actually eventually have Dataverse Service Client kind of be the de facto SDK service, that SDK capability that we will use to go ahead and interface. Now, the paradigm that I would say is, like, for example, if you're going ahead and building things like plugins and all that stuff, the CRM Service SDK is still very good, and primarily because it still works with .NET 4.6, 4.6, and 4. Up to 4.8 as well, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Dataverse Service Client is purely .NET Core, all right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're building an external function, as it is, like, you know, an Azure function or something of that sort, my personal recommendation to you would always be use a Dataverse Service Client. But if you're going ahead and building a plugin and all that stuff, that's where the CRM Service SDK comes in.
Yeah. So I never knew that the Dataverse client couldn't connect to on-prem. It only connects to online. I never knew that.
Yep.
Okay.
There you
go. I mean, we had a discussion on the Level Up chat room not too long ago about someone saying, "Hey, I don't see the that it's available or that it says it worked with .NET Core 6." And I was like, "Well, I used it to import 20 million records in my project, so it works on my Azure function just fine."
There you go. Well, you see, but you were using it as an Azure function, as a client app, right? And that it will work by and large fine, all right? But it's been mostly optimized for cloud workloads, and that's essentially where the focus for Dataverse. If you have cases where it's actually worked well with on-prem stuff, well, great, but that's not the set of use cases that we're optimizing it for.
Okay. That's great. And so because it uses .NET Core, then that means that the PAC CLI is cross-platform. Is that a test scenario that you're doing with each release? Are you making sure that it runs on Macs, and also Mac Silicon, and also Unix systems as well?
I love the fact how you restrained yourself in saying, "Is it cross-platform?" Yes, it is.
Well, I mean, I just maybe it's a leading question, but No,
it is. It definitely is, Scott. It's definitely a cross. That's one thing. Again, our engineering team. This is again credit to David in general, but the fact is, David himself works on a Mac. So the engineering manager for the PAC CLI actually works on a Mac. I work on Windows, and then the engineering team that's actually working on all the different use cases, it's a mix and match of Linux and Windows boxes as such. So and I also have my personal Mac that I use, in which again I'm trying things out. So whenever we have our bug bashes or we release things as such, we try to cover the entire gamut of platforms that we support. But the intent is always going to be, now, truth be told, there are certain capabilities that don't necessarily convey well onto .NET Core. And that's just the last update that we just did, where we now brought in PRT, CMT, and the PD tool.
You need to tell us about that.
Let's skip the acronyms for our listeners, because I only caught one of those things. So the PRT, the plugin registration tool, that's the one I got. Right. Okay, so you can actually use that to do the plugin registration stuff. All right, what's the other stuff?
CMT is configuration management tool, right? And PD is package deployment, all right? And those were three different tools. As Scott mentioned before, you had to actually have a PowerShell script to go download them from NuGet and install them on your machine. We just now got rid of that entire PowerShell experience, and it's now just integrated directly into our platform, the PAC CLI. And basically, because those elements are WPF apps, they don't necessarily convey onto Mac and Linux, right?
Okay.
Likewise, we also have the data management capability, the data migration tool on the Power Platform CLI. That is also a very Windows-centric, because the underlying libraries are very Windows-centric because they're using .NET 4.8. So that's why, again, that's a very Windows-centric. But everything else, from things like PAC Admin, Solution, .NET Publish, and all that other stuff, those are all cross-platform. So it's only for those certain types of functions where some of them are very Windows-centric, but by and large, 95% of all the PAC CLI commands are cross-platform.
So this means I can stop using David Yak's xrm.tools to download the SDK, because I don't know PowerShell, and he has it all on his website to download it, and I enjoy that. So now I can use the PAC to go through and grab those things and download.
PAC tool PRT.
That's it.
There we go. I think I've almost got muscle memory now. Almost.
So is it PAC? Is it PAC tool PRT will download the latest version of the plugin registration tool and then run it then immediately?
It will immediately launch it. There's also a command there. So if you do PAC tool PRT update, so if you've already installed it, it will immediately go to NuGet and fetch the latest version and then launch it as well. So it'll also update things for you too.
So on our podcast, we always give people homework to come on. Things like, hey, you need, you dedicated your time and your talents to come here and share with us, and then we give you more work to do because we're nice.
Right.
So I've got 2 more tools. You need to have a PAC Tools XTB for the XRM toolbox, just to download that. And the second one you need is a PAC Tools XTC for their XM Toolcast to actually go ahead and subscribe to the XM Toolcast. See, that's
exactly. That's the priority. That's in your backlog. That should be
yeah, exactly. Scott, I'm gonna put those issues on your GitHub repo, okay?
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah. Yeah, you have to be careful.
I'll take contributions. All right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is actually a great point. Okay, so we have got this amazing set of tools which is being worked on, and I love the cadence that's happening, and there are release notes, and you can see what's coming out, and it's fantastic with all these new things. I will type PAC and just see new things popping up because it will always, VS Code will always install the latest automatically. So
right.
I love that. So, what's the position around open source on those set of tools? So say, for example, Daryl wanted to submit a PR to create PAC tool XRT. XTB. I don't know what I'm talking about.
XRT.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I have no idea. But I was just going with the flow with where Scott was going. I was like, yeah, I'll play along.
Yeah. I think many people do that. Yeah. Which actually Scott going off on one. Yeah. So XTB, PAC tool XTB. So if Daryl wanted to submit a pull request, what's the sort of situation there?
Okay, so there are 2 things. One, as Scott rightly pointed out, we release every month. So we're right now in the throes of just kind of cutting our October refresh, and we'll release that in November. And that's because we spend the month of October working on some cool stuff, and we release it in November. But even though we release it in November, it's still called the October refresh. So it's always a month behind from the month where we're at. Now, the interesting part is on the open source part. So our intent right now, at least, Daryl, since Scott picked on you as well, I'm going to pick on your contribution story here, right? But
sure,
open source, and Scott, I know you know this from experience yourself as well. It's not cheap, right? It requires a certain level of commitment, curation, and so on and so forth. But our intent is to at least make the repository at least available to folks like yourselves as read only, so you guys can at least get a look at exactly. And we do that already with the VS Code extension as well. So it's not like we haven't gone down that path. We've been very careful about building a contribution model. So internally within Microsoft, so for example, we already have an internal inner sourcing model happening. So the Power Apps team is the one that's actually going ahead and building a lot of the Canvas functions, right? The Power Pages team has also been building some of the PA portal commands under PAC. So we have that kind of inner sourcing model. Now, the challenge obviously comes in is when we go ahead and now make it saying that we're ready to accept contributions as such to the entire world, there needs to be some level of commitment to make sure that, one, you don't feel like you're being abandoned, and I'm using the royal we and you in this case, all right? 1, and 2, we also need to make sure that the capabilities, what kind of tests you have to go run in order to make sure that that code is even worth committing, all right? Have some very strict guidelines in saying how, what guidelines you have to meet before you can actually even create a PR for that matter, right? And that work we have to go do, and it's not something that comes for cheap. It takes a lot of time and at the same time, it's not like, well, we never want to be, and I believe we will fail if we do this, right? Where folks like yourselves just continue putting in PR ad nauseum, and we do nothing about it. I firmly believe we will lose you folks that way, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So I would love for us to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row in that context. But at the same time, we are going to be very transparent in how this is being developed, making the code at least available on GitHub, and so that you folks can see exactly what's going on. We still interact with a lot of folks on issues. So, I know, Scott, you've raised a bunch of issues on the VS Code extension, and, David has been, very prompt in responding to a bunch of things. I'm also pretty, between Dave and I, we kind of share responsibilities in answering some of the issues that are there. But that's the level of commitment that we're committing to for the time being. Having said that, once we have all our ducks in a row, it's a matter of just literally opening up the floodgates and saying, yes, we now got this. So Daryl, when you come in and say, I want to go add PAC tools XTB, at least you'll have a rules of the road saying, okay, if you do X, Y, Z here, this is when your PR would be accepted. All right. The last thing I want is you just submitting a random PR and saying, hey, why did Kartik or David accept my PR? we really don't want to have that conversation. But I know it's a very long-winded way, Scott, to answer that question. But I think, but you kind of realize it's a hard balance for us to kind of figure out. And the last thing to me, we will fail if we feel like your interactions and your commitment to our technology, all right, and we don't reciprocate that way. And it's very easy to do that when you open source something and don't reciprocate with actions following it up. And so that's why we don't want to fall in your eyes. And that's very important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I really appreciate that open and honest answer, and I really appreciate the sentiment that you're saying. You could just say, oh yeah, we'll accept PRs and we'll have, yeah, sure, and then but almost it's just a token gesture because you're never really intending on taking those in. And like you say, it's probably going to do more damage than good. And if you were to look at a tool like the XRM Toolbox, I think from that perspective, Tanguy doesn't really, I don't think he really accepts PRs on the XRM Toolbox now very much. He's basically the primary contributor. But in a sense, it doesn't matter because of the plugin mechanism there, right? So everyone can create a plugin and they can use that for their own purposes, or they can, make it widely available through the actual, the plugin registry. So, I mean, is that something you've considered? Have you considered having an extensibility model for that? Because really, it's the authentication. I think that's the thing that's the tricky thing that really the PAC tool does a very good job, and also managing verbs and parameters and all of that kind of stuff.
So the answer is yes. So the inherent extensibility is actually inherently built in the PAC architecture, right? So I do fully expect by the time when we make the PAC CLI code base available as read only, I fully expect the community to be able to clone that repo, bundle it into their own custom solutions in whichever way they like, and so on and so forth. So that's an expected behavior that I fully expect to have happen. I think that's, because at the end of the day, if let's say, Daryl, you go ahead and build your version of PAC CLI that has PAC tools XTB, if there's a problem regarding that, people know, okay, let me go talk to Daryl directly. All right. Because if they come to me and say, oh, why is XTB not working? Well, it's because we didn't build it. This is our reference code. So I do. It's a matter of making sure, one, we want to engender that kind of community that they can go ahead and build it in such a way. The architecture is there, right? You're able to go ahead and extend it whichever way you like. It's just that when coming into contributing your changes back in, to be completely candid, as I said before, we're not ready yet, and that's a muscle that we have to build. Yeah, and I know there's interest. So.
Yeah. It's a big commitment, but whenever I build sort of command line tools, you spend so much time just doing the same thing over and over again. It's that the commands and authentication and stuff. So I think just that on its own, if you were to package that up and be able to have people to be able to, like you say, include that in their own projects, then that would be a really, really great thing.
Well, here's a thought experiment, right? Because we're considering building a C# interface for PAC CLI, right? Okay. So that it actually makes it easier from an extensibility standpoint. And if you want to build in integrations on top of that, is that something that you think? And this is kind of to the entire and the listeners of the podcast as well. I mean, feel free to reach out to me, but this is definitely something that we are actively considering, is building a C# interface on top of PAC and just saying, hey, if people want to build in a lot of that stuff, instead of calling PAC directly, they can just overlay, or let me be very clear. If you're building, let's say, an integration into an IDE, instead of today, the integration would be that you go /shell exec, call PAC, and do that. If it's a C# interface, you can just call directly from within your code and just pass the same set of parameters directly. Would that be something of interest that will allow you to look at it from an extensibility standpoint? I mean,
that's That's what I've been praying for and asking for from Matt for years on the CRM service util. Because then I can stop having to shell out in the early bound generator, the XM toolbox to go and create the connection. Like, here's my service, do your magic. But he always, Christmas is coming up. Maybe he'll be nice. I don't know. But.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if you can deliver on that. That the thing that Daryl's been waiting for. That's extreme homework.
Yeah, I should make sure that I don't have my notebook here, and I've already got like 2 bullet points. I should actually go ahead and start writing down because it's going to be an entire
you should have brought a bigger notebook, to be honest. But I've noticed that there is a hidden parameter which allows you to pass in and retrieve JSON to the PAC. So you can actually shell out and pass it JSON and then retrieve JSON back from it.
Absolutely.
So there's kind of a little bit of interoperability there already. So what you're talking about there is a much deeper an API that you can invoke as part of the same process. That's really what you're talking about.
Treat as a standard DLL reference was really
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the capability that Scott's alluding to is it's if you do PAC interactive, it goes into that JSON mode where you can actually take in JSON inputs and then spit out JSON text. As a matter of fact, some of the integrations that we've done, with this spec called Cloud Native Application Bundles using Porter, that's essentially how we orchestrate, if you will, the backend Azure and simultaneously also import solution into dev, test, and prod environments with the Azure backend being orchestrated simultaneously, and using Porter as a wrapper around this, and then doing that. So it's not slick. It's a great proof of concept, but those are one of the cases where customers have gone ahead and wrapped around PAC using the interactive capability of command line, and then use that as a way to orchestrate applications across multiple different environments, as the case may be.
Yeah. A question I get asked a lot is about the use of the PAC CLI inside DevOps and GitHub pipelines. So I remember, I don't know, was it 6 months ago or so? There was a version 2 released of the Azure DevOps tasks. And so that's, as I understand it, now using the same kind of code base as the PAC CLI, or is that actually using the PAC CLI, or is it using a copy of the PAC CLI?
So I'll let you in on a secret. We wanted nobody to even know the fact that we had changed the engine while the car was still running. and unfortunately, we failed. Okay, because our goal was on the Azure DevOps side was to go ahead and basically get rid of the PowerShell pieces that were running for Azure DevOps in particular, and just replace that directly with PAC CLI. We thought we had we had done a lot of testing internally with some of the internal customers, including our sister teams in the Dynamics 365 sales and others who were using the Azure DevOps tasks as well. It was wonderful when it was all within the 4 walls of Microsoft, but as soon as it went out in the wild, we started getting, it's like, you guys broke us. Actually, I was there in the level up Discord group, and unfortunately, I was public enemy number 1. So
I remember those days. I think I was involved in that one heavily, saying, "Hey, you just unregistered all my plugins."
Yeah, exactly.
You were throwing stuff.
Glad it wasn't fraud.
Yeah, I do. Like, let me put it this way: I do lurk around in these kind of user groups just to see how things are going. But it
was a fun day.
It was a beautiful day. All right. Well, let me put it this way. Well, Daryl, just on that part there, I want to be very thankful. I really don't care the level of feedback, even if it's unfiltered, because I appreciate the noise and the noise quotient that you generate, because it lets me know you care, right? That is very important to me. All right. Whether it's feedback, because and the reason you care is because you care enough to be able to go say, hey, this is not working. And I want to really impress upon that. This is one thing I really appreciate about the entire community in general, is the fact that your actions speak volumes about the level of care that you have for the success of the product in general. So I don't want to fall short of your expectations that way. All right. So let me be very clear. But at the same time, when we were, so what happened in this case was we said, okay, let's take a step back. How do we do this better? And so that's when we said, okay, we'll come up with a newer version, which is the 2.star version. All right. And if you run the 0.star version now, which is the PowerShell based one, you'll, in your build log, you'll see a warning message saying, please migrate to the 2-star version. The reason being is now both GitHub actions and the Azure DevOps actions, the 2.star versions, both use the latest and greatest PAC CLI, right? So our goal has always been is that when it comes to developer integrations, and that's what we're trying to strive towards, is PAC CLI becomes that focal point that enables a lot of these things, right? So if you look at even the VS Code extension that's there, it's built around the PAC CLI gestures. So one of the ideas that we're now thinking about, I know there were some of the folks in the community that basically said, hey, you guys go ahead and created this wonderful extension inside VS Code, but yet when I want to go into a solution or when I want to go into a package or even a plugin or a PCF control, I have to go to the terminal. Why can't I just do a right click using the UI controls there? The cool thing is because the stuff already exists in PAC CLI, to build that UI control is a heck of a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that we're also exploring right now is to, again, make your collective lives a lot easier and say, okay, initializing it, how can we go build it? But the key thing with PAC CLI, and the good thing about it is that every month that we release PAC CLI, it immediately propagates. A week after, we already update Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions with the latest and greatest PAC CLI. So it's you're never in a situation where you're out of step with what's available publicly. It's all the capabilities. Now, I also want to be very clear, just because there's a gesture available on the command line, it does not automatically convey over to a CI/CD gesture, right? So, because there was we got into this kind of philosophical discussion with one of our internal users, like, no, every action that you have on the CLI should go ahead and have an analogous on the CI/CD side. And we're like, well, give us use cases for this. Okay, you're right. that won't work. Like, all right,
because I want to be able to open up the plugin registration tool inside my my Azure DevOps pipeline.
Exactly. So I was like, all right. So as soon as we started being a little bit more specific on the use cases, then we realized, okay, yes, you have a point. There's a reason for that now. But if there are tools like, for example, on the Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions piece, data management. Right? So if you want to migrate your data as part of a CI/CD, when you're creating an entire new environment, you upload an app and you want to move some of the data along with to go do your testing in that environment, that you can now go to. There's a CI/CD gesture for that. That's been a long ask from the community saying, hey, you guys go ahead and create this ability to import the solution into my environment. But if I want to migrate my data, I have to now step outside, go in, open up DMT or data management tool, and then migrate my data if I want to. So that was one of the things that we ended up doing, was like bringing that gesture directly to CI/CD as well, because that should be part of your CI/CD process.
Now you keep on saying gesture, and is that
gesture.
Just gesture? I mean, is
Gesture.
that just the actual action that you want to perform? So PAC, whatever the next word is. Is
Exactly.
that is?
All
right.
I guess.
Yeah. So Dave calls it incantation. I call it gesture.
Luminos.
Yeah, exactly.
PAC Luminos.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So
PAC Spelliamus.
You see, now you're asking me to really get into the Harry Potter genre here, Scott. That's where I have to go pull in my daughter in this whole thing, all right? Because the only thing I know is Patronus.
Oh yeah, it's Expector Patronus. Oh dear.
See, anything in the 80s, I'm good with. I mean, I was thinking, so 80s, cool. The new stuff, I'm a little rusty. All right, I'm not even there up to speed on Game of Thrones.
Well,
anyway,
I mean, it's great to hear that the version is being updated in Azure DevOps and GitHub, and that's fantastic. I mean, that really just, the fact that you're updating one and then very quickly you're updating the other is means that any worries of
you got to be able to sleep better
creeping in, Yeah, exactly. Because you might be doing something in dev and you'd be able to reproduce the fact that it's happening in DevOps,
Mm-hmm.
But it does. It's funny because I've always thought it's slightly ironic, and I don't know, maybe I'm on my own with this, but it's slightly ironic that you've got a command line tool that you can run in the command line, on your developer in VS Code, but then inside inside your Azure DevOps pipeline, you can't run it as a command line. You have to use the little configuration box. I mean, have you got any plans to just like Node or
homework item number 3?
Yes, or Git. I mean, if I can just go and do Git and I can get my token and I can authenticate against Git and I can just run Git commands directly inside my pipeline. So have you thought about providing that facility?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the 2.star version, right, it is, when you do the Power Platform Tools installer, it is actually installing PAC CLI directly into your runner. And for all intents and purposes, there's our PowerCat team, Mark Schweigert's team, who are building the COE toolkit. There are certain gestures where they've built tasks inside Azure DevOps where they call PAC CLI directly, because we haven't provided the gestures, and that's what they do. They actually run PAC CLI in their CI/CD pipeline with the commands that they want to go use. So
nice.
It is possible. You can do it. It's just, we haven't broadcasted it as much as we'd like to.
Well, you have now.
I have now. So it's out of the bag.
I mean, can we edit this out? I don't know.
No. Look. We're talking to a community of people who are, engineers. This is gonna happen. People will figure it out. There's no reason for me to go hide behind something. It's there. So and again, it would be complete injustice to assume the fact that we have figured out all the different use cases, right? I mean, that's why, Scott, when every time I talk to you and Daryl, now that I'm going to start talking to you more instead of lurking around in Discord. All right. But I learned so much. Like, just because we happen to be sitting inside the four walls of Microsoft doesn't mean that we're privy to all possible scenarios of usage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I lean on folks like yourselves and your expertise and saying, oh, by the way, these are some of the blind spots that you currently have, and maybe you should incorporate that directly. Now, I can assure you, we have a pretty long backlog. so when
funny you should mention that, Kartik, because that was going to be our next question, wasn't it, Daryl?
Well, let's give me some time to get to that, and because I do want to impress upon this, because I was actually talking to one of the community members this morning too. And one of the things I mentioned was, I said, listen, it's very easy when you're working on a piece and saying, hey, I want this tool in the product. And it's great because at that point in time, you're looking at how you can get to the next step. And when you pass that over to me, or to Dave for that matter, and if I'm thinking 2 steps ahead, Dave's thinking 10 steps ahead. All right. And what we end up doing is we say, okay, when we bring that into the product itself, what are some of the experiences that we can optimize on? So, for example, if today someone's going ahead, there's an experience in which one has to jump through a lot of hoops and things like that. By merely forklifting the existing piece of code and bringing that into the product doesn't necessarily do it justice, because it's not value adding in any way, shape, or form. And so we have to kind of look at it and say, okay, this achieved the job at this particular tactical level. Now, when we want to bring it into the platform, how do we scale this at a platform level? All right. So some of the considerations will change and very likely change. So, I know I sound very flippant saying, oh yeah, we can just, give me your contributions. That's not it. There's a thought process there in which you want to say, look, if there's a broken experience today, when we bring it into the product, how do we remedy that broken experience and value add so that when you do want to use the tool, it's not necessarily a one-to-one replacement to what you had, but you're able to do what you were not able to do or what you were doing before, but now faster. Right. So that's the consideration that we have to go put in place in that context. And so, yes, backlogs there, and you're more than welcome to keep piling on stuff. And my only other thing would be is the wider the blast radius, the better it is. So make sure when you ask me for a particular feature and say, okay, these many customers are impacted. Like, okay, now we've got something. All right. So I think that's the angle where which we come from and say, okay, it's never a forklift. I want to be very, and this is a broader community, right? Just realize that it's not a forklift. It's, we look at what you have and then say, okay, when you want to bring this, we want to bring it into a much better, let's say a higher fidelity experience that one would have, than it would look like as if someone just went to, wrote a PowerShell script and made the thing work. All right.
Yeah. Well, it's when the PAC CLI first came out, the Power Apps CLI, it was PAC PCF was the sort of the primary use. I mean, that was
exactly
what I was using on a daily basis with that. And then gradually these things started to kind of get added in, and it was like, oh, we got PAC Solution, but I can see how PAC Solution is to do with PCF. And then suddenly we've got PAC Solution Clone. And, so gradually these verbs were being added. And so it became clear almost organically that it became a thing. It was never like set out to be this huge replacement for this revolutionary replacement for everything. It was on our radar, but it didn't ever really, I can't remember when we thought, you know what, this PAC CLI thing is actually, it's doing 90% of the things that I need to do.
I remember when that happened for me, because it took over my Canvas app packager. So the PAC Canvas pack, like I don't have to, or unpack, I don't have to maintain that anymore. Like you took that on yourselves. You said, hey, that's a great idea. We're going to take whatever we want and throw most of it away because you guys have a better implementation of that because you actually know what's going on behind the scenes, and I didn't. But yes, that's one. Even now, like the first thing I do when I work on a project, I have a little write a little script that just takes whatever the most recent MS app file that I've downloaded and then extracts that off to my local machine so I can see what heck's going on with it. So
Daryl, so you give me a lot of homework. I'm going to give you a homework now too. Is that
okay?
We just announced PAC Canvas Create. All right, where you can now go ahead and create it's part of our overall story on at the app from API vision that we have. So think about the fact that today when you create an API endpoint or a function, you have the ability to go publish that Azure, but you don't have the ability to immediately create a custom connector directly from that new API, new shiny API they've built. All right. So our goal today is the fact that we are creating all the little piece parts, if you will. And one of those piece parts is that I can, once you've gone ahead and created a custom connector for your API function, you can then do PAC Canvas Create, and it will create an MS app file that was, and it's not intended to be like, hey, here's a full blown app. It's an app to show you exactly how to call the connector to be able to call the API and get the data into a Power Platform. The problem I was being is, let me put it this way: as people who are used to using Postman, all right, you expect to do HTTP GET, but as soon as you bring a Canvas app forward, you're like, okay, it's now clear collect, and then call the connector and so forth. So it's there to help people understand that. And I would love, Daryl, for you to go try it out and see, hey, how does that work well, right? It works closely in conjunction with the PAC connector command, which is also right now in preview. We intend to GA that very soon. But the thing around that is the fact that everything works on Dataverse. So my homework to you is try that out. Look at the experience. I'm not going to tell you anything else. Someone who just walks into this right out of the gate without any clue, what's the experience like? And just send me your unfiltered feedback on what the experience was like.
All right, so I just ran it and I need a connector. Okay, so that's the first experience. Is I've got to learn about connectors because I've never actually made a connector. So there you go. Homework done. Did it on the bus. I don't have to worry about it now.
Yeah, wow, that was quick. That was quick. I kind of thought that I was giving you like a thread to a ball of wool, and then you just keep on pulling on it. You just stopped at the first inch. What's wrong here?
No, he just got the ball of wool to go. Nah.
Microsoft will figure it out. I don't care. Anyway, so yes. Go ahead, Daryl.
I think my light bulb moment was when yours, Daryl, was when you were, it was replaced your packing tool. But mine, I think, was when it was actually quite recently. I was teaching sort of some development team topics around plugin registrations, web resources, PCF, solution ALM, just a kind of like an overview of all of the whole things around from a pro dev perspective, you know, transitioning into the Power Platform. And I suddenly realized that I hadn't left the CLI. I'd done nothing that wasn't covered by the PAC CLI. You know, everything right down to configuration migration tool and using the package deployer. I think so. Tell a lie. The only reason I needed to was obviously go into Visual Studio to do the plugin and to create the package deployer project. So you know, it was 90%, 95% of the time was just using the CLI, and I think that was the moment that I realized, you know, wow, this really truly is a one-stop shop. So I'm really loving the work you've been doing, and I think, you know, everyone will share that sentiment. But the you know, we're both dying to ask, you know, what's next? You know, you mentioned the PAC Canvas Create, but you know, can you share anything with us? Is there anything that's not NDA that you can share?
So there are quite a few things that are currently coming in the near horizon, so to speak. One, we're actively working on, I know this sounds it's not a very fancy thing, but auto completion. All right, that you're able to go ahead and register a PAC, and if you tab, you'll get the auto completion based on whatever. So it's just, as a developer, that's just the kind of experience one is used to. So that's one area that we're working on right now. The other piece that we're actively working on, and this is kind of finishing up the story around connectors and connections in particular, and I do mean connections. It's been a kind of serendipitous confluence of a lot of things that we're currently doing. As you saw, we talked about the pipelines capability at the Power Platform conference in Orlando a few weeks ago. As part of that journey, we realized there were some endemic things that we had to go fix. One of them was the notion of connectors in Dataverse context, but very soon, I mean, you know, the notion of connections, and specifically, what happened was the fact that when we started looking at when you look at automatic deployments from one environment to the other, connections become a really painful process throughout the whole, you know, going from dev, test, prod. So there's work that the Power Automate team has gone ahead and done, where they're now bringing some of the connection capability directly into Dataverse. And why is that cool? Well, for things like that don't require interactive consent, so to speak, you will very quickly be able to go create connections to connectors as you move from one environment to the other. And so one of the things that we'll be exposing through the PAC CLI is not only the ability to go create connectors, you'll now be able to go create connections as well, right?
Neat.
So exactly. And this would take advantage of a lot of those things, like, for example, the deployment settings files that we you know, when you do PAC solution create settings, right?
Yeah.
It'll take advantage of that infrastructure, so you'll be able to go create the appropriate settings as such. To be completely candid, if we ever in those scenarios expose any client secret in a configuration file, we have failed. All right. So the design experience that we're talking about in this case is that when we talk about things like settings and so on and so forth, ideally it would be in like an Azure Key Vault or something of that sort, and you just reference that directly. So we take whatever needs to be realized at runtime, but during the actual deployment, the CI/CD tool is not going to evaluate whether or not the runtime instance actually has access to the Key Vault or not, or whatever. But the intent is to make sure those values get updated based on dev, test, and prod. So that's one of the big things that we're currently working on, and that's a collaboration between us, between the Power Automate team and the Dataverse team in general. Our goal, if we do everything right, our goal is to actually retire that PACon tool, right, which is the Python-based tool that the Power Automate team did, and move the community over to the PAC CLI version, which will now cover both connectors and connections as well. So that's the one that is really near-term horizon. That's something that we intend to go address very quickly.
Neat. That sounds great. Well, you know, you heard it here first. You know, the XRM Toolcast is becoming the single source for sensationalism.
Exactly. It goes back to the topic we were talking about right before we started recording. So there you go. Full circle.
Yes, exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, it's fantastic to talk about these things, and the topic of a CLI, I think, could probably quite easily be quite a dry topic. But Kartik, you make it incredibly engaging and fun to talk about. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you, and you guys, I can't thank you guys enough. You guys, keeping you guys happy is what I get up in the morning to go do. And I'm not just pandering. I mean, I really mean it. I really, really appreciate, the energy, the enthusiasm, and what the community and you guys channel. It's just unbelievable. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I think I speak for Matt and for Dave and everyone else. Thank you for what you do.
I'm loving this relationship here. We're both thanking each other and appreciating
there
each
you
other.
go.
So we could be in way worse areas, but we're approaching the max time limit we have to record, so we're going to have to wrap this up, Kartik. If anyone wants to get a hold of you, I guess if they want to do anything around the PAC, is it PAC CLI or is it just PAC? Like, are we? Because the A,
either one.
Power,
either
CLI,
one works.
like PAC.
Either
right?
one
So,
works.
I don't
It's
know.
called PAC CLI. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
We
Anyway.
we comprehend it.
So if they want to look at that, it's on GitHub. They can submit issues. They can have discussions even on there, and you're heavily involved with that. If we're contacting you personally, what would you prefer people do or not do?
Okay, so out of all the monthly blogs that I put in, I usually say there's an email alias called ISVFeedback@Microsoft.com. The reason why I'm giving that DL is because it's the entire engineering team and myself all look at that email coming back. Actually, there are two more PMs in my team, Marcel Fajera and Shafkat Nizar, who are also involved. So they're all there to going ahead and helping answer some of the queries that come in. But if you want to get a hold of me personally directly, it's pretty straightforward. It's Kartik, my first name, the first two letters of my last name at Microsoft.com. So it's Kartik, K-A at Microsoft.com. And again, when you send something directly to me, just realize there may be some delay in my response, but I will respond. And if I don't respond within a reasonable time, feel free to send me a stinker email. I'll get right on it.
I was expecting Twitter, LinkedIn. No, you gave your email address. It's like giving away the keys to the Porsche, right? Like it's
let me put it this way. LinkedIn is fine, and I mean, Daryl, that's how you got a hold of me, right? But Twitter is great. I just think there's a level of informality that comes along with those. Whereas when I give you my email, I think there's a level of trust that I have with the community, and I know a lot of you will not misuse it. So that's the level of trust that I have with you folks. All right. So there's that. If any way, shape, or form that trust gets violated, well, I know where you two are.
Let's hope the YouTube bots don't just pick that out and use it. I'm sure there's some out there.
Just put discount code XRM Toolcast in the email, and
no, it's not rocket science. I mean, if you were in the Power Platform conference, I actually had my email on all the slides, so it's there.
Okay. All right. Well, Scott, that's how our listeners can get hold of our guests. How can our listeners get hold of us?
Well, yeah, absolutely. You can email us at cast@xrmtoolbox.com, or you can get us on Twitter and LinkedIn at xrmtoolcast. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know about any things you would love to see in the PAC CLI, and we can pass them on to Kartik, or any subjects you'd like to hear us talk about, or any guests you'd like to have on the show in the future. Do get in touch. And Kartik, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really, really enjoyed talking about these things and really loving what you've been doing with the PAC CLI. And we're looking forward to the future.
Thank you, guys. I had a blast. Thanks.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Cheers then. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
This has been the XRM Toolcast with Daryl Labar and Scott Darrell. Produced by Lynn Zawin. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to cast@xrmtoolbox.com, tweet @XRM Toolcast, or hit us up on our LinkedIn XRM Toolcast page.